Alright, well, welcome to Friday, people. I'm trying something a little bit new. I'm going to be reading a little I can't even speak, an excerpt from a book called Ireland by Frank Delaney. He is a very, very wonderful storyteller. I have read to about page 79 right now, and it's just a really good read. And also, this is kind of a little bit of a vlog. I am going to be doing something hopefully on Sunday. I might either look at Job or Jonah for the Sunday inspiration. Maybe at a later time I might incorporate that into a Tuesday or Thursday one. It just depends, but I don't get a whole lot of views on it. So I guess I'm just gonna maybe read like a chapter or so and then see if I want to continue that way. That could make a lot of videos. I'm not sure how much of an attention span people will have. Basically, it talks about, the story itself takes place in the winter of 1951. A storyteller, the last practitioner of an honored centuries-old tradition, arrives at the home of 9-year-old Ronan O'Mara in the Irish countryside. So apparently this guy stays with them for 3 evenings. They talk about kings, saints, all of Ireland's accomplishments. And this little author's note mentions, let's see. It says, therefore, to understand the Irish, mere facts can never be enough. Ireland is a country that reprocesses itself through the mills of its imagination, but we all do that. We merge our myths with our facts according to our feelings. We tell ourselves our own story. And no matter what we are told, we choose what we believe. All truths, in quotes, are only our truths, because we bring to the facts our feelings, experiences, and our wishes. Thus, storytelling, from wherever it comes, forms a layer in the foundation of the world, and glinting in it we see the trace elements of every tribe on earth. And then what I liked is this book really makes me want to visit Ireland even more, because there's an awesome map. And I believe there's only 22 counties in Ireland. County Mayo, probably Mayo is, I'm not even sure how you pronounce that, is probably one of the most common ones. Galway, County Limerick, County Cork, County Kerry, Waterford is where the Waterford crystals come from. Wexford, I think they did like glassware. I'm not really sure what all these other ones are famous for, but the main one I know is Waterford, and that's where Waterford crystal comes from. That's in the very southern part. So I will read, not sure how far I want to read. Let's see. Because my guess is that more than like if I want to give an excerpt, I guess, let's see. Just a girl. A kid in my soul. Well, I'm going to find a good place to stop if I'm going to read this one. I guess I'll read the first 22 pages, and then I'll have to leave a marker here. We'll see if I can get through this in a enough time so it doesn't go too long. Wonderfully, it was the boy who saw him first. He glanced out of his bedroom window and looked again, and harder, and dared to hope. No, it was not a trick of the light. A tall figure in a ragged black coat and a ruined old hat was walking down the darkening hillside, and he was heading toward the house. Sorry about the light there. The stranger's face was chalk white with exhaustion, and he stumbled on the rough ground, his hands held out before him like a sleepwalker's. So he's probably just really exhausted. He looked like a scarecrow deserting his post. High grasses soaked his cracked boots and drenched his coat hems. A mist like a silver veil floated above the ground, broke at his knees, and reassembled itself in his wake. In this twilight fog, mysterious shapes appeared and dematerialized, so that the pale walker was never sure he'd seen merely the branches of trees or the arms of mythic dancers come to greet him. Closer in, the dark shadows of the tree trunks twisted into harsh and threatening faces. Across the fields he saw the yellow glow of lamplight in the window of a house, and he raised his eyes to the sky in some kind of thanks. With no fog on high, the early stars glinted like grains of salt. He became aware of cattle nearby, not yet taken indoors in this mild winter. Many lay curled on the grass where they chewed the cud. As he passed, one or two lurched to their feet in alarm and lumbered off. And in the house ahead, the boy, 9 years old, and blond as hay, raced downstairs, calling wildly to his father. The stranger's bones hurt, and his lungs ached almost beyond endurance. Hunger intensified his troubles. He'd eaten 1 meal in 3 days. The calm light in the window ahead pulled him forward in hope. If he held their attention, he might get bed and board for a week, and maybe more. In the days of the High King at Terra, a storyteller stayed 7 days and 7 nights. Did they know that? Nobody knew anything anymore. With luck, though, the child in this house would help. Children want stories, and the parents might stretch their hospitality, fired by the delight in the boy's eyes. Unlike last night's billet, high up on the hill farm, he slept in a loft above the cows, where the east wind got at his bones. The ignorant people there, who had no use for stories, gave him no food and closed their fireside to him. It happened more and more. This house would surely prove better. And it was, after all, Halloween, the great time of year for telling stories, the time of All Souls, when the dead had permission to rise from their graves and prowl the land. I guess this would have been better to read round then. Over the last few hundred yards, the fog dispersed into flitters and wisps. At the house, a small white gate opened from the lane into a country garden, which in summer would shine with bunched roses and morning glories and tresses of sweet pea. The tall man in the black coat rapped twice on a brass knocker. I just lost my place. Immediately, the husband of the house opened the door. Aha! The stranger and the householder exchanged a solid handshake, eye to eye. Behind his father, the boy waited in the hallway, jigging from foot to foot. God save all here, said the stranger. He hunched his shoulders nervously. Over the years, his voice had grown deep and rotund. His manner and speech had an unusual formality, with trace elements of stately English from the earlier century, and a hint of classical learning. Consequently, his language being generally more colorful than the speech of the people he met every day. The man of the house smiled and stood aside. Come in. You brought clear skies to us. With your permission, I'll bring clear thoughts, too. Your coat is wet. Let me take it. The man extended a cold, bony hand to the boy peeking around his father's waist. A fine boy. God save you, too, ma'am, called the storyteller to the woman of the house. She looked irked, and he guessed that he, the stringy, unwashed man with skin like canvas, would disrupt her rigorous household. Nonetheless, she set a place for him while her husband, pleased and comfortable, poured the visitor a drink. The boy watched the stranger attacking the food like a tired hound. He sensed the man's hunger fought with the man's decorum. Nobody spoke because the newcomer seemed too famished to be interrupted. The boy examined the man's face, saw the long, thin scar, wondered if he'd been in a knife fight, perhaps with a sailor on some foreign quayside, and the sodden boots. In his mind he saw the stranger fording streams, climbing out of gullies, traversing slopes of limestone shale on his endless travels across the country. Did he have a dog? Seemingly not, which was a pity, since the dog would have sat guard by the fire at night. Did the man ever sleep in caves? They said that bears and wolves had been long extinct in Ireland. But had they? That evening, in the White House among the fields, a boy's most passionate dream came true. His father had long talked of the traveling storytellers. He said they possessed brilliant powers. They brought the long-gone past to life vividly, without what he called the interference of scholars. Those professors, he said, they dry out history in order to put it down on paper. In his father's view, a tale with the feeling taken out of it had no blood and was worth very little. The old stories, told by traveling storytellers around the fireside on winter evenings, they came hurtling straight down the long shiny pipeline of the centuries. Characters all love and hate and fire, tumbled out on our own stone floor. So said his father. They're still among us. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them came here one day. He'll probably be tall and old, with boots and a hat, and he'll chant us all. And now such a storyteller had arrived. He was the last of his breed. Figures like him had trudged the countryside for 25 centuries, telling the story of Ireland in one form or another. In the old days, they were beloved. A visit from one often gave a village its brightest moment of the year. They had counterparts all over the globe, India, South America, and China. Such travelers wandered into a village, spread a rug under a shady tree, and began a day-long tale of the country's old times. They called up dragons, and fire, and mountains, and maidens, and gods. Weary villagers who drifted forward to hear what was being said always stayed to the end. Whatever the topic, the audience knew they could be assured of vitality and drama. Great events, told in bright colors with huge spirit. Thus the traveling storyteller and his oral tradition shaped much of the world's culture and character. The storyteller tongued the last crumbs from behind his teeth. He moved to a chair by the fire where he prepared to smoke a pipe. From a yellow oilcloth pouch he offered a fill of terry black tobacco to the husband, who thanked him and said he didn't smoke. The stranger filled his pipe, picked up the iron tongs, plucked a tiny ember from the fire, and planked it on top of the pipe. After much sucking and tapping, the tobacco glowed, and the blue smoke drifted forward in search of the chimney. He leaned back in his chair. The boy had settled directly opposite him on the cushions of a long wooden bench beside the hearth. With teeth tall and yellow like a horse's, the storyteller smiled at the boy, who still gazed huge eyes at the sorcerous creature. Do you know what an architect is? The boy looked at his father for approval before he answered. A man who causes buildings? And do you know where Newgrange is? Up in County Meath? Sure enough. May we ask on the banks of what river? The boy glanced again at his adored father. Isn't it on the Boyne? At a noise from outside, storyteller swung his head hopefully. The door heaved open. A man and woman ambling with 2 daughters, aged 12 and 8. One was blonde and one red-haired. They wore flowered pinafores. The younger girl was directed to join the boy on the high bench by the fire, where she sat watching the storyteller with wonderland eyes. A coal fell forward on the hearth. The storyteller sucked vigorously on his pipe, and it made a little dottle of noise. Next moment the audience increased again. Another couple strolled in from across the lane with their young daughter. Word had obviously spread. Perhaps someone among the farms earlier, seeing the tall stranger's descent through the misty fields, had guessed who or what he was. So he'd have an audience tonight. Whether he'd have one tomorrow night or a venue would depend on him. "What would you like in your whiskey?" asked the host. One neighbor said, "More," and they all laughed. After some minutes of talk and smiles, everyone settled down. No electricity in the houses in those days, an oil lamp in the window, and another with a glass sconce on the wall laid gilded shadows into the room. The firelight played on the storyteller's long face. He jiggled his pipe, eased back in his chair, spread his shoulders, and began. So I will just read to page 12. Every worthwhile story begins with the immortal words, "Once upon a time." Never did a phrase ring so true as it will this evening. I have come to this hospitable and decent house to continue my life's work, to do what I do every night of the year, and that is to tell the story of Ireland. The tale I shall render you this evening concerns the most brilliant Irishman of all time. He was the architect of Newgrange, but as all stories should, this one begins before its own beginning. And that was a long, long time ago, before there ever was a place called Newgrange, before there was ever an architect to build its famous work, even before there was a country called Ireland. So, once upon a time, the ground upon which we walk was no more than a lump of stone down in the center of earth. It was part of the thick shell containing the furnace that rages down there night and day, and that thick shell was always kept cool by oceans that covered it. In the early days of our planet, the shell was weak in places. The flames burst through again and again, and vast layers of rocks were flung to the seas. The boiling volcanic surface spread over prehistoric oceans. It split and reformed into wide lands of nothing but black rock. And these split and reformed and cooled and split again until 2,500 million years ago, there were 5 continents. The continents became all the countries of the world. And so every land on this planet is the child of ocean and rock, water and stone. Every day and every age since then, some rock or island somewhere crumbles and breaks off at the edge of some landmass. Many of the fragments still retain the shapes of countries and continents to which they were once joined. On the maps of my school days, some of them look like couples who've gone to sleep close to each other and floated gently apart in the night. Tomorrow, take out your atlas, look at Ireland and Britain. Together they look like a child curled up asleep near a larger child, who is then curled up in the lee of the parent continent, Europe. That's how our own country and our most important neighbor began life, as stone born of fire and cooled by sea. Some of the ancient rock is with us still. I can take you a place far down on the east coast where you can see and touch it. Near Wexford there's a stone, which the locals will tell you dates to 2 million years BC. 200 miles higher up the coastline as a crow flies, there's another such rock, in Antrim. I looked closely at these 2 items. I could see the specks of quartz sparkling inside them. They looked like the eyes of little creatures who saw mighty flames that imprisoned them in the rock long, long ago. So the fact is, when the volcanic earth mostly stopped heaving, Ireland amounted to nothing more than a cold field of stone. Much, much later, sediment from the universe floated over and settled on the stone acreage and spread and thickened there like a primal silt. Gradually, across the hard plains, there rose an island of rich loam and gentle hills, where today quiet rivers flow through green woods down to seas full of glimmering fish, where shiny horses and their foals gallop across the meadows in a bountiful and misty land flowing with milk and honey. That's how the world thinks of us today, and we're glad of the compliment, which is accurate enough, but it isn't the whole story. Before the land finally settled, before the final phase of seeds blew in on the wind and fertilized it, before the birds and insects again made their homes there, we were also born of another great earthly power, the direct opposite of fire. We were born of ice. 4 ice ages attacked Ireland, one after another, and the ice took possession of everything, destroyed any fertility that had been established, and ruined any progress nature had made. Wherever it met rock, the ice's freezing edges gleamed like the starched frills of folded cloth. It found hidden flaws in the mountains, ripped them open, and filled them. They're what were called glaciers, and in time they became today's rivers. In the largest rock faults, the ice cut channels wide enough to turn into eventual seas. That's how Ireland was cut away from Britain. 12,000 years ago, a vast sheet of compacted and frozen snow broke away from the Arctic Circle, which surrounds the North Pole. It was thousands of feet thick and hundreds of miles broad, and when it finally rode down the curve of the planet, it looked like a floating country. They say the ice on the move sounds like the beginning of the world. With shouts louder than the voice of God, its shelves heave and crack. The intensity of its light alters every color it meets. Ice, they tell me, is never pure white, never a fixed or lone shade. It is ivory, it is silver, it is chalk, it is salt. Except that, according to polar explorers, I've met more of them in my own travels, ice isn't white. Close up, it handles as white. At a certain distance, it stands as white. But those who know it well, who have stood on it, lain on it, even fallen through it, they say the ice in bulk glows blue. But it had other colors too. Do you know the names of the noble metals? Gold, silver, and platinum. All ice shines like those noble metals, and all color, as we know, is determined by where the light falls. As the island of ice moves south, I wonder how many shades of gold the sun sparked from it. Yellow and bronze and copper, amber and brass and saffron. And then at night, under the wind-whipped moon, thousands of new shades glinted, mostly silver, soft or piercing or ominous, or benign. So there it was, sinister in its bright lights and content in its own power. Its noble metals flashed. The sound of its great creakings and crackings echoed across the waters, and the whole glimmering mass headed relentlessly down the northern seas like a great glowing ocean liner built for a nation of giants. It was the biggest iceberg ever seen, 1,000 times bigger than the one that sank the Titanic. It was its own landscape and its own geography. The fierce weather of the north had polished it like glass, and the harsh winds of the east ruffled it and etched little furrows on the plated surfaces. These shells looked like ruched fabric or ebbing sands, and the whole mass had hogbacks, crests, and headlands and forelands, all sharp-edged, jagged, and crystal. The bow of the great vessel formed itself into a fierce and concentrated spearhead. It slammed forward in slabs and reefs so wide the very horizon seemed made of ice, and it attacked Ireland with spikes half a mile high and half a mile wide. After it came ashore, this great iceberg plunged south across the country. It kicked rocks and even hills out of its path. It scooped out valleys and glens that never existed before. A few peaks and ridges were higher than the ice cliff, and they continued to raise their spears above the ice. You know them, mountains like Argyll and Donegal, Galtimore and Tipperary, Croagh, Patrick, and Mayo, where pilgrims after the Ice Age climbed to be nearer their gods, and do so to this very day. Among the lower slopes and in the deep valleys and ravines, the ice fought every fold and won every groove. A new cold gripped the mountains so tightly that its chill penetrated to the stone's deepest core. The wisest men tell us everything, sooner or later, changes, and all change commences with a specific moment. We say to ourselves, I won't do this again, I must become different, and we succeed, eventually. I've described to you how the ice had ripped onto the terrain on its advance. Well, it did so too on its retreat. Large melting slabs of ice gouged out caves, fjords, and chasms. The ancient stone foundations of our land shook, undermined by the desperate slipping ice. Rocky glens opened again as their walls crumbled. The clay began to breathe. Hills and mountains shone in the new sun, and down their slopes poured ribbons of new silver waters. When you gaze at the mountain from a distance, and you see a shining river that looks like the spoor of a snail, you can be sure that was an Ice Age stream. The final loosening sent boulders sliding down mountainsides, hurled stones down valleys, as the ice ripped them away from the rock bodies. These glacial erratics, as they're called, loiter to this day across the Irish landscape, some of them big as houses. I myself have been glad of their shelter many times, and they lie at the core of the story of Newgrange. As though to collect breath, the storyteller halted. Puffs of steam rose from his wet boots as they dried in the heat of the fire. In the pause, people stirred. The boy looked anxiously at his mother to check her mood, and she seemed calm. His father took off his spectacles, polished them with a little amber cloth. Without his glasses, his sky-blue eyes sparkled. The boy pushed down his stockings and rubbed his shins, now hot and mottled from the fire. Nobody moved from where they sat. One or two of the men had taken off their jackets and sat shirt-sleeved. Their faces glowed with pride as much as heat. This epic account gave them the story of their own ancestry, the origins and magnificence of their own country. The women seemed more placid, less intense in their enjoyment, but none the less enthralled. Nobody reflected the magic of the hour, much as the children, whose faces glowed like lamps. As the storyteller gathered strength for the next installment, he curled one hand around the bowl of his pipe, raised the forefinger of the other hand commandingly. He drew 3, 4, 5 silent puffs on the pipe and took it from his mouth. So I think what I might do is just kind of find a place to stop at and see what happens. I'm going to try to keep them closer to 15 minutes, but and other than that, I'm listening to the radio in the background. And I might have something in the background. I don't know if I will all the time, and I don't know how often I will do these. Just if I hold people's attention. So that's it. And thank you for tuning in to Reading of Ireland. I know it looks really backwards and strange, but